Good afternoon, everyone. As people are coming in, want to kick things off. My name is Huang, President and Principal of Econsult Solutions, and this is the 7th of 8 sessions in our webinar series, Critical Issues Facing the Higher Education Sector. I'm pleased to be joined today by two speakers, um, the topic for today's webinar will be taking the long view, sustainability paradigm change at universities. Um, Today, we will be hearing from Rob Fleming and Raymond Barclay. Rob is an award-winning educator, author, lead accredited professional, and architect. He is the Director of Online Innovation at the Weitzman School of Design at the University of Pennsylvania, where he develops executive education programs focused on sustainability design and design leadership. Rob is also the Director of Sustainability at FCA, an architecture and design firm in Philadelphia. Rob is the 2023 AIA Philadelphia President and serves as a board member for the Center for Architecture and Design, where he co-founded the Justice Alliance for Design Education. Rob is the author or co-author of 4 books on sustainable design and is currently writing a book on survivability, which now that I've said that word, Rob, you're going to have to explain that in your remarks later today. In Rob's former life, he was the founding director of the MS program in sustainable design at Thomas Jefferson University. Good afternoon, Rob.
Good afternoon. Pleasure to be here.
Also joining us is Raymond Barclay, Chief Operating Officer and Senior Vice President at Alma College, who works collaboratively across campus sectors to allocate resources and manage day-to-day operations of the college. He's responsible for many aspects of the college's business operations, including facilities, IT, admissions, and non-traditional revenue generation. He also focuses on strategic matters of the college, including student recruitment and retention, financial analysis, debt structure, and capital projects. He joined Alma's leadership team in March of 2022 after serving as Chief Planning Officer at Albion College. And prior to joining Albion, he served as President of Enrollment and Design LLC, an enrollment and academic planning consulting firm in Princeton, New Jersey, which he founded in 2017. He's also served in various capacities at the New School in New York City, Stetson University, College of Charleston, University of North Carolina System, College of New Jersey, and Burlington County Community College. Raymond received his bachelor's degree from Indiana University of Pennsylvania, then obtained a master's in divinity from Princeton Theological Seminary. He holds a master's in sustainable design from the School of Architecture and the Built Environment at Thomas Jefferson University, and earned his PhD in educational psychology at Temple University. Good afternoon, Raymond.
Good afternoon. Happy to be here.
Excellent. So let's start off with a historical view of the issue of sustainability in campus operations. What has been the historical arc of how universities think about and implement sustainability solutions on campus? Rob, we'll start with you.
Sure. Well, this is a great question. I wanted to focus in on the word thinking, and I find that sustainability is as much a paradigm shift as anything that we're facing in the world. And part of the reason that we've historically not done well in climate change is we're still using age-old paradigms that focus on profit first and sustainability second. And so what I want to talk about today is this history of not moving quick enough to sustainability. And I'll just get right into why I'm now a survivability guy, is I wonder if we didn't do enough fast enough to stem the tide of climate change. And I think universities, although have been leaders in sustainability and integration of sustainability, I don't think universities as well did enough or are doing enough in terms of facing the challenges that we have right now with climate change.
Thank you. Raymond, anything to add to that question?
Well, in terms of the history and the paradigm, I think, campuses, primarily their early efforts stemmed out of sort of more traditional environmentalism. And so a lot of the influence happening on campuses was really stemming out of that paradigm, sort of early 70s, and the Earth Day movement. And so curriculum began to get influenced. Campus outreach, more in a charitable model rather than a capacity building model, sort of took hold. But it was a foundational aspect of sort of where we are now. And then, later, 80s, early 90s, you started to get the United Nations, basically the Higher Education Sustainability Initiative was a key initiative that I think influenced kind of systemically a lot of sort of our modern paradigm. And that is really where several organizations sort of came together post Rio and sort of began to set expectations and standards around how we define sustainability today, with a focus on the K through 16 sectors, and really kind of highlighted the intersectionality of economic and social justice with sustainability and what that meant in terms of capacity building. And you had several organizations from there begin to sort of be given life, right? So you started to, the United States Green Building Group, ASHE, which is a sustainability effort that sort of focuses on capacity building, sets a array of metrics that help institutions think about where they're situated in the broader context of higher ed on a variety of factors like academic planning, innovation and leadership, and operations, and several other organizations, began to be given life. I think now, kind of where we are as a paradigm now, is that higher ed's been a real leader around green building design. They've been a leader in terms of thinking about where how their academic values and embody sustainability throughout their curricula. I think, though, the question now is, how integrated is sustainability from a vantage of its planning life? And what does that mean as campuses have begun to move into the innovation space and more campus community partnerships and collaboratives? What does it mean when you situate sustainability in that nexus between campus and community? And how authentic are the structures that we have in place to sort of promote sustainability within both our planning and budgetary life within higher ed, but also in the way in which we construct those partnerships and are inclusive and participatory in how we're engaging folks in that conversation with us. And so you're starting to see organizations begin to think more deeply about that. And I don't think it's any accident that some of the movement around DEI over the last 3 to 4 years has influenced that. And so I think it's an exciting time to think about the overlay of sort of the more traditional kind of transactional dimensions of sustainability as it pertains to building and design, now in this context of policy, planning, and justice. And so I think those conversations are exciting, and it's going to be really interesting to see how they evolve and mature over the next few years.
And Lee, if I could just follow up on that, but go ahead.
Please.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think I agree with everything Ray is saying, and I think that it sounds good, but I think we at the universities have an idealized self-image about ourselves and our relationship to sustainability. So, for example, you'll often hear faculty say, well, sustainability is woven into our curriculum. And yes, it's on the syllabi, but when you get into the classroom, it's not really there. It's not really essential to the core content. And I could say, and this is where people are going to get mad at me, I could say even for campus facilities, it's not integrated at the level of which it's talked about. And I think there's a gap between what we say we're doing, what we believe we're doing, and what's actually happening.
Thank you. And I want to explore all of that. I really appreciate the context that both of you gentlemen provided, and want to get a little bit more practical. So Raymond, this next question is for you first. You have a lot of functions in your portfolio. And so, here we're talking thematic and interdepartmental and mission-oriented and values-oriented, but practically speaking, how does sustainability affect the day-to-day of the things that you have responsibility for in your institution's operations?
Right. Well, I think most folks, if they've been tuned into higher ed, know about the demographic cliff, right? That there's fewer, first time in college students graduating. I think that's impacted different sectors within the higher ed framework variantly. So you have R1s versus comprehensive colleges, which are more regional in orientation, and liberal arts schools. And it's influencing how those schools are thinking about their efficiencies, their budget, and how they manage themselves, in some respects similarly, but in some respects differently, and what the motivations are, in particular, behind their expansion strategies or capital planning strategies, and how they manage their debt and their revenue. So, in terms of pragmatism, it's sustainability has become, within many campus frameworks, almost synonymous with, in terms of the operations of the institution. I'm not talking about the academic side right now. Within the operations of the institution, it's almost become ubiquitous and conflated with really conversations around efficiency and ROI. And so my sense is that there's really not a conversation that happens on the finance or capital side that isn't considerate of certain sustainable aspects of sustainability, but they're often in the context of a fiscal conversation. And I'd say, to Rob's point, it varies by institutional culture and board culture how prevalent those conversations focus on the values and the rationale for why we're doing it, right? And so the ROI questions and the efficiency questions are a safe place to be, because in essence, we don't offend each other, whether you're conservative or liberal, or where you fall in that political spectrum fiscally. If we stay in that efficiency realm, conversations tend to be pretty civil, and right, we all want to save money, and we all know that there's these challenges facing higher ed. So I'd say, whether it's stormwater management on a project, natural resource management, where you have ecological quadrants on your campus, maybe you have a bog under your purview or some kind of nature center, whether or not you're creating climate action plans that focus on resiliency because you're trying to think about how the buildings will fare in those contexts, and so on. Sustainability is pretty prevalent part of the culture. I'd say, though, that those conversations oftentimes only include the sustainability professionals at certain junctures, in terms of the folks that might be a little bit more engaged in the why, beyond the ROI or efficiency questions. And they definitely are uneven in how they have people participate along the spectrum of those conversations, right? So you may have Siemens Energy come in and do a study around your energy use, but usually the people that are in that room are the COO or the CFO, and maybe the president, and maybe a facilities director. You don't find a whole lot of other people in those conversations. So I think the reason is because of the planning paradigm, within higher ed, that it's very linear, it's very traditional in terms of a strategic planning frame. It doesn't kind of encompass more design frames or charrette frames that are co-constructive, and it allows for sort of select hearing, right, along the spectrum. And so those conversations tend not to be very well integrated, or tend to have junctures where the sustainability conversation doesn't open up more broadly outside of those areas that are safe, because of the very highly engineered orientation of most strategic or capital planning or master planning processes. And so I think what's hopefully an interesting influence of justice conversations in those intersections I talked about earlier is if we can start to get more co-constructed frames, and folks like Rob, who come out of a design background, are a lot more comfortable in those processes. And so the question is, how can we make higher ed more comfortable in those processes to allow for more than these kind of rote transactional, highly focused conversations as it pertains to sustainability, right? We're hitting outcomes, we're doing some things that are important, but they're not necessarily driving towards more of the systemic issues that we need to be talking about in a more open forum, and then considering where most of the money spent in higher ed, which is on capital planning, right? And so I think, those are the kind of things we need to think about more openly and honestly, not in any way, shape, or form diminishing, given the challenges of higher ed, the importance of ROI and strong fiscal management and so on, that just so happen to be supported by sustainability.
I appreciate that, and I want to throw another question to Rob. But for those who are just joining, this is critical issues facing the higher education sector. Today's topic is taking the long view, a sustainability paradigm change at universities. And I'm joined by Raymond Barclay of Alma College and Rob Fleming, ESI Senior Advisor, and also affiliated with Weitzman School at University of Pennsylvania and FCA. And so, Rob, we've been kind of going back and forth between the practical and then kind of more missional. And so I wanted to pose a question about this current younger generation, which we all know is a very values-oriented one and is not afraid to voice those values. And so there's kind of a two-way street as it relates to institutions and their students. So I was wondering if you could comment on to what extent are the student voices influencing how universities are thinking about sustainability? And conversely, to what extent do universities understand the opportunity to, in turn, influence this generation on the issue of sustainability?
Sure. I'm going to answer that by partially responding to Ray and then transitioning into your question, if I might. And first of all, I want to say that the term ROI is a very dangerous term. It is used in many cases to say no to people who want to do things that aren't within the paradigm of a university. So for example, let's say that we want to put a green roof on a building because we have stormwater issues, but the university has not done a green roof before. There's nervousness, there's uncertainty. And so the green roof is canceled, but then we come back and see that there's a very expensive copper roof put on the building. So it was never really about return on investment. It was never really about first cost. It was about the leadership of being able to think outside of the box and think long term. And that's what the young people are looking for. They're looking for leadership among our generation to say that climate change is a real thing and we want to take action that's definitive. So for example, at University of Pennsylvania, the school paid a price when the students took over halftime of the football game for an hour. So the fact that we didn't have that ability to have that discussion about divesting in fossil fuels, for example, came out in ways that the university didn't want. I don't know all the details at Penn. I just saw it happen. I've seen it at other schools where we don't engage, and then we're upset when there's a protest. We're upset when the students put tents in the middle of campus. And those are indicators of unrest and dissatisfaction with the status quo. As leaders, and we have the opportunity then to do what Ray is talking about and co-construct, co-build, co-create a vision of the university's future that includes the students and their perspectives as stakeholders. And I would argue faculty as well are stakeholders. I'd argue that physical plant, the people cleaning the buildings, are stakeholders. And again, it's a paradigm shift to a more holistic, more inclusive way of thinking that is more long-term, involves multiple perspectives, and is global in its perspective. I think that's the other problem. We're not thinking globally that the decisions we make in our purchasing and our procurement have impacts at the North Pole, in Alaska, in places where sea level rise is real. And until we start to adopt that paradigm of thinking long-term, thinking big scale, we're going to continue to have this unrest on campuses, and we're going to continue to be in awkward, uncomfortable situations that we don't want to be in. I know Ray's been in them many times where the students are upset. Opening those lines of communication. And I will say, to give Jefferson a little bit of credit, students wanted to divest from fossil fuels, and they said, let's talk about it. And we did. And they said, we're not going to divest from fossil fuels. We're not going to do it, but let's talk about coal. Maybe we do want to divest from coal. And the students then had a dialogue with the leadership of the university about what's really at stake here. And boy, was just the level of authenticity and the level of connection was just wonderful. And then the students were like satisfied in a strange way that they had got their voice heard. And I think this is why we don't separate justice, design justice from climate justice. You can't really separate them if you want to look at a holistic model for how universities can be leaders in the future.
Taking questions in the chat, I'll throw one out around rankings, which are catnip to many of us, but to some of us, it's like, these aren't really legit, or they're counterproductive. What is your guys' take on university rankings around sustainability? Are those a legitimate expression of schools that are doing better than others? Is it something that schools should consider how to aspire to a greater score, or is it not helpful at all? Any opinions on that?
You're all right, Rob. I jump in on that.
Sure.
So, within academic, so I've worked across larger universities and smaller universities, and the capacity of the institution to sort of reflect on the job it's doing around this is a little different than a U.S. News and World Report ranking, right? Which is externally imposed on a variety of inputs that may or may not hang together methodologically in the construct of that assessment. In this case, campus is self-reporting after having done sort of various inventories and review. And if a campus is a little bit more mature around its sustainability efforts, it'll have some administrative or academic governance structure that's inclusive and involves different parties. That process by which the campus is forced to engage and reconcile some of those questions is a really useful, I think, self-reflection tool. Does it cover all the necessary components? Does it push as hard as it should into some areas related to innovation and justice? I'd say in the case of one predominant ranking, probably not. But I will say it opens up kind of an earnest conversation within the campus about how well it's doing on some key inputs and outputs, which do lead to other maturation of processes and operations or activities that can push the campus along. So I think from a formative assessment standpoint, it's useful. From a summative assessment standpoint, meaning kind of the end game, I'd say it's really about the conversation it promotes. And I'd say what's probably less valuable is whether you're gold or platinum or green or blue. For me, that's probably not as important as kind of giving some structure around a framework for reflection on the campus.
Okay. Rob, what's your take?
I think that awards are dangerous and are transactional in nature. They do generate conversations, but the conversation is, how can we use these awards to make ourselves look better so that we can then generate more enrollment? But I do have to agree with Ray. I don't want to be a total naysayer. I mean, it does generate a good conversation, I think. But here's the thing. Lee, I have consulted with universities that decided not to go for certain levels in STARS, for example, which is a rating system for campuses, because they didn't want to go for it unless they got gold. And this is the danger of rankings and hierarchies, is it actually detracts emerging universities from being successful because they can't meet those standards. Everyone is in some level of sustainability in their campuses, and there's got to be a better way to acknowledge those efforts, and maybe just a clearinghouse of what each school is doing. Why does it have to be ranked? Because those ranks we know are superficial and largely self-reported, and then somebody is sitting in a room deciding what those ranks are going to be. And I wonder if that's an inclusive group of people that are making those decisions in the end of why this school is number 2 and why this school is number 9.
Thanks for that. We're among many industry professionals, but for the lay folks among us, Raymond, you invoked ASHE a few times. I wonder if you could say more about that, just so that everyone knows what that is.
Basically, they've been around for a few years. They're based out of Philadelphia. I'm just looking here. They've got what's called a sustainability tracking assessment and rating system, and it's they're a higher ed organization membership organization that promotes different aspects of sustainability capacity building on the campuses. I'd say they're a full acronym. Their acronym is for the Association for the Advancement of Sustainability in Higher Education. I'm sorry, I didn't say that. And they're probably the most well-known group. Second Nature would be the other group that has done the president's climate commitment. And so they're probably the other kind of external higher ed focused, United States focused higher ed organization that tries to promote commitments and assessment of the degree in which you're advancing climate justice or advancing sustainability initiatives. And so that's basically the quick summary.
Add to that too, Ray. I agree with everything you said. And STARS is an amazing program because it seeks transformation. And one of the things that blocks a lot of universities from STARS is that you have to get enough points, you have to start disclosing your investments. In other words, if you're a university investing in fossil fuels, you'd have to disclose that in order to get to the gold or platinum rankings. I think that's a good thing. I think in that case, I hold STARS up as a great example of a rating system that is trying to move towards transformation rather than a ranking system, which is subjective in nature and not really transformational.
Hmm.
And I just say one other thing about they really probably in terms of a predominance, they focus most on faculty and students and curriculum. They have, they have programs and support for other elements of the campus's activities, but probably within that group, you sort of see they generate most actively information around curriculum and support for faculty and student learning and embedding those kind of activities in the curriculum.
In closing, Raymond, and then Rob, and without getting too philosophical, the webinar series was born of just the tumult of this current time. Everyone is focused on the here and now. In another sense, universities are uniquely suited to take the long view. And sustainability obviously has kind of immediacy to it, but also something that plays out over decades, and if not longer. So, how do you advise that universities square that circle between the things that they have to worry about on a day-to-day basis, but leaning into this longer term perspective that they, as anchor institutions, are able to take on an issue that requires both immediate action as well as sustained action over the long haul.
Yeah.
Raymond?
So I've tried to get some conversations going through a small nonprofit that I help out on the side called ARCD. ARCDI is the acronym for it. If those are interested in checking it out, for me, the impetus behind sort of supporting that work was really the majority of higher ed institutions spend their dollars in two areas: capital planning, along with debt servicing, and secondly, in investments, right? So what are the two areas that potentially, from a campus vantage outside of the curriculum, have the most? And when I say that's where they spend the majority of them, I mean by and large exceeds anything else they really do. And it's also where the interaction happens with the local community and the region. It's the vehicle by which innovation and new initiatives are spawned. So it is significantly influential. My concern has been over the last couple of years that those processes by which those activities ensue are not sufficiently engaging stakeholders in a way that is as productive as it could be, that allows these other issues to rise, that will then indeed allow us to get to stronger solutions, deeper consideration of the kind of issues related to climate change and sustainability. And until those doors are really opened or kicked open, that it's very difficult. It'll be very difficult to influence the significant amount of dollars that are going towards these efforts. And think about what a missed opportunity that is to be better leveraging, beyond getting a gold star for LEED, really stronger sustainability outcomes. And so the question, I think, is really what's beyond LEED? What's beyond sort of stars? What's beyond these kind of superficial kind of input and output assessment mechanisms for what we're accomplishing on our campuses? And how do we get to sort of more authentic conversations around how we sort of community build?
Excellent.
And so that for me is the big challenge, and the areas that we should be trying to influence. And I think design in particular, why I've partnered with Rob over the years, is design, I think, provides some lens or vehicles in how we might do that, from a standpoint of methodology or mechanisms. And so I'm happy that we're starting to see some influence of designs and more authentic charrettes and those sorts of things happening within the campus culture, because I think those are the kind of vehicles that can bring some of this work to fruition.
I really appreciate the through line of engagement, and I think Raymond has teed up this theme of design. So take us home. What's your take on all this?
Yeah, I'm going to surprise you here, Lee. Although I held everybody accountable today for not doing enough, I also think that universities should celebrate their wins and take stock in all the great things that they've done. I don't think we do a good enough job at that. I don't think we tell the story as good as we could. For example, I worked with a client who didn't think they were sustainable. And I said, did you put white roofs on all your buildings? Well, of course we did. That's a logical thing to do. Well, you just saved 5% of energy costs on your top floor only, by the way. And I think that universities are, even though I complained all day today in this session, I think universities are doing a lot. Please take credit for your wins and tell that story as much as you can. The younger folks want to hear that story, and they want to hear it authentically and transparently.
Excellent. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time, and audience members, really appreciate your engagement. We have one more session, same time, same place next week on energy. Until then, have a good afternoon, and thank you again for joining us.
Thank
Take
you.
care, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.